All right, looks like we're recording. Welcome, everybody. I see a lot of unfamiliar names, so welcome to all those outside of Carpenter Chartered, and for those unfamiliar names that are here in Carpenter Chartered, welcome as well. Um, Today, we're talking about special monthly compensation, spending some time going over how to prove up some of your claims, what kinds of benefits are out there, and ultimately how to maximize benefits for our veterans. So if you have questions, please just speak up. I probably won't see any icons or anything that you do on the screen. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat if you prefer to stay in the background, and I guess I'll ask either Katie or Tammy if you see some questions, just let me know. But feel free. This is a presentation for you. So I really encourage questions and comments so that we can all learn. If you don't do a lot of SMC, it's daunting and a little scary. I will say that it took me probably about 3 years before I felt like I kind of knew enough to feel comfortable doing SMC claims, and mostly because we don't do a lot when we first start out. But then once you get it, then you can see it everywhere. Every time you look at a fight, like, oh, that should have been SMC. That should have been aid in attendance. So hopefully this is the beginnings of that for all of you. And you can take this back to wherever you're practicing and help out your veterans. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, hopefully you're seeing the title slide. I'm going to switch around screens a little bit through here. I've got some things on the other screen. I did pull up the attachments that were sent out by Tammy, or I think they were also part of the invite. And then I have a couple regulations that I wanted to pull up. So SMC, and of course it doesn't do that. Okay. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about what is SMC and the different kinds. And again, if you have questions, just speak up. Okay, so what is SMC? SMC is special monthly compensation, and it is a type of compensation benefit, as the name implies. Just like the other compensation, it's tax-free, and this is the way I describe it to my veterans is similar to this, but basically it's for more disability that doesn't necessarily impact your ability to work, but is something that impacts your, as it says here, quality of life. It is above and beyond the 100%, and as it says here, there's no vocational element. So you can actually be working and earning money and still earn and receive SMC benefits. Now, some of them are pretty inconsistent with work. You'll see which ones those are, but folks lose limbs, lose eyes, and they're still very productive in the workforce. So it doesn't mean that they can't work, but for some of these SMC ratings, if they're working, then they probably don't qualify. Grievous injuries, as I said, lost limbs, and just really the quality of life is so diminished that they want to give a little bit more money for them. So why is this important? It can be significantly more money than the 100% rate. And in most cases, it's very apparent and not difficult to prove that they have it and that they deserve it and that they've earned it. So again, once you see how to prove these claims up, then you'll start to identify them and issue spot them, and they'll just be everywhere, and you'll wonder why you left all that money on the table. Okay, so most veterans don't know that SMC exists. They've heard of SMCK. Some of them have heard of S, loss of use of different body parts. or the housebound with 100 plus 60. But most of them have never heard of special monthly compensation. They don't know what it is. And so you're going to be probably the first person to introduce them to it. There's some veterans who are very well educated on this. And in fact, the way I learned it was from one of my clients, and he schooled me on it for a couple of years, and he kept bugging me, you got to do this, you got to do this. And I didn't see it initially, but I was trusting him, and we kept appealing, and then finally it clicked. And so I give, the genesis of my path down SMC is to him. And he was very, a lot of these veterans get very read up on this and understand it fairly well. Okay, so 100% rate for a married veteran, no children, you can see there $4,045 a month. This is what the SMC rates add to that. So K, again, most of us are familiar with that 130 a month. You can actually have more than one K rating depending on the various losses that you've experienced. S, another one that we're familiar with, adds $457 a month. Now, when you start to get to L and above, you can see these numbers start to become very large and looking very similar to 90 to 100, 90, the TDIU kind of claims. So SMCL from 100% is almost $1,000 a month more. O and R1. R1 is kind of the end of the road for most veterans. There's very few that get up into those higher levels of R2 and T, but that's an additional $5,700 a month. So if you're getting your veteran from, say, a 70 or 80%, you get them 100%, you get a pretty nice payday, and then you somehow manage to get them up to R2, that's $5,700 per month. And these take many, 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 many months to get done right. Even when after you've identified it, it's probably sat waiting for a claim or waiting for somebody to raise it for at least a couple years in most cases. So the retroactive money that these generate can be substantial because it just takes so long to get them. And it's not unusual to have veterans, as we know, fighting claims for 10, 15 years, and you get involved, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, you should have been getting, an L plus, maybe a couple steps up, or even R1 for those 15 years. And you can see the math is pretty, it's a lot of extra money for these veterans. But keep in mind that these are really, really disabled folks. They're not just not able to work, but in most cases, they can't really function on their own without this money. They require lost limbs, aid and attendance. They have to have somebody or something there to help them just get through their day, navigating their houses, going up and down steps, using the toilet, these kinds of things, go into their appointments. So even though this looks like a lot of money, it's really there because they need it, and they can certainly use it.
Hey, Kenny.
Yeah.
What if your veteran already has a home health aide through their VA health insurance? Does that make a difference?
No. The only rate, and it's not in the slides, but the only rate that you cannot receive if you that you don't always receive even when you qualify as R2. So if you have R2, if you qualify, but you're in a VA paid for facility, you only get paid at the R1 rate. I'm not sure if the T rate is the same. I actually don't know the answer to that. If anybody does, let me know. I don't think it is, but for sure R2, if you're in a paid, but you can be in your own private facility and still receive the R2. But if VA is paying for it, then you don't get that extra couple thousand. Okay, and those bolds, again, those are the most common ones, L, O, and R1. R2 and T, again, they're out there, but I have not encountered too many folks that qualify for that. And usually if they do, it's at the end of their life. I mean, they're in a nursing home facility, they're severe dementia, Parkinson's that is advanced to such a degree that they don't even know who they're talking to. So typically when they get to that stage in their life, they're pretty much, they're not going to be around much longer. So, but I think T, particularly after the recent case law, which we'll touch on in a few minutes, you can probably have a T rating as a young 20-something veteran and live a very long life having a T rating. So, but the R2 is very, very significant. Okay, this is one of my favorite regulations, and one that I will say certainly the VA doesn't understand well. OGC kind of gets it. The courts are they go back and forth. They issue a ruling like Bailey, and you're like, oh, they get it, and then you file another appeal, and they act like they never heard of it. But what this regulation does is it's actually titled scope of claim. And so what this is telling the VA is certain ancillary benefits are within the scope of a claim. So I want to highlight one that SMC is specifically mentioned in the regulation. So they've acknowledged by regulation, and this is really just a codification of their practice for decades. I mean, they did this forever. And this was just, and if you read the Federal Register, they're saying we're just putting in writing what we've always done, even though they never really did it. But a few things that I want to highlight for this regulation is, number one, it says VA will adjudicate as part of the claim ancillary benefits. And look at the language of the rest of the sentence, that arise as a result of the adjudication decision. Okay, this phrasing is really important, and why the VA doesn't understand it, because they're looking backwards instead of forwards. You can't get aid and attendance, for instance, until they've acknowledged that the disability that requires it has been service connected. So you can certainly claim it ahead of time, but they're going to deny it because they haven't recognized that disability or those disabilities as service connected. But once you get the decision recognizing that that back injury happened in service and that all of the resulting disability is from that injury, now you can say that disability is so severe that I need regular aid and attendance. So the remainder of how do I want to do this? The remainder of the regulation, which again is ignored, right here that I highlight. The claimant may but need not assert entitlement to ancillary benefits at the time the complete claim is filed. So I read this to say that I have up to any time after a decision's made to tell you that I want an ancillary benefit. Now, certainly if you do it in a reasonable amount of time, let's say within a year with a supplemental claim, or within a year with a higher level review or notice of disagreement, you're going to fall within the gambit of this regulation. But I don't think that you really have to do it within a year, particularly when there's evidence that suggests that you already qualify for it, treating this very similar to a TDIU rating, because that's really all it is. It is a TDIU rating. And we put in 1114 in the materials, and you can see that it just keeps going. After J is K, is L, is O, P, R, S, T, all the way down. So these are simply ratings. They're much higher ratings, and the VA, most of the VA adjudicators and many of the higher level reviewers do not understand that this is a rating, and they really treat it as its own claim, its own issue. And so far, we haven't really gotten any precedent decisions that say this. Ackles, Bradley, and Bowie allude to it, but they don't really come out straight out and say this is just a rating like TDIU. We're hoping we've got quite a few cases in the hopper at the court that'll ask them to address this. We'll see where they come out, but just treat this as a rating, whether it's a 50%, a 70%, TDIU, it's simply a rating. Okay. The other part that I want to, let's see. Okay. So the recommendation here is with the supplemental claim typically, but I don't usually, aid and attendance is one of the big ones. It's going to get denied at the RO level almost always. Their M21, if you haven't looked at it, they've updated it in June to give a little bit more clarity that no, you don't have to claim it. And there's actually a nice little chart that if you go into into an RO hearing or you go to the HLR, you can point them to this and say, according to your chart, you should have addressed aid and attendance here or some other SMC. It also further clarifies that you don't have to have a total rating, but it invents this extra scheduler SMC, which I don't even know where that comes from, but it kind of suggests that there needs to be something sent to the director of compensation if they're not total. There's no basis in law for that. So if they, and I don't even think there's a mechanism for that. I've asked before how they do that, and they're like, I don't know. It's not a 4.16B kind of extra scheduler rating or a 3.321B rating. It's something that they just kind of, it's a roadblock that they put in there to prevent them from granting it is my assessment. But if you have a total rating, they're typically more inclined to grant it. But if you don't, I usually bypass the RO entirely and go straight to the board. Okay. How do you claim it? As we said, it's unsettled on how you initiate it. I just had a hearing last week, I'm sorry. And the board had granted an earlier effective date and assigned a total rating back, several years. I filed a supplemental claim and asked for an RO hearing and said he qualifies for aid and attendance from that initial rating. And the hearing officer said that she said, well, so what you're asking is that it was CUE in the board to not adjudicate a raised issue. And I said, no, this is just a supplemental claim asking for the ancillary benefit. So she on the record went around and around trying to figure this out and couldn't comprehend that they were just supposed to just adjudicate it as part of the claim. So the VA will tell you that you have to file the 2680 DBQ form. It's not even a claim form. It's a medical examination report, but they are right now demanding that form be filed before they can have any jurisdiction, as they call it, to consider aid and attendance. And I say aid and attendance a lot because that's usually the most common one that we file for. Now, you certainly can use that form, and if you use it, the VA is going to see it, they're going to know what to do with it, and they're going to process it. But don't limit yourself to that. The 526 is also a form that can be used, but I wouldn't use the 526 unless it's very clear that they had a new worsening, that they now qualify for aid and attendance, or they now qualify for one of the other SMCs. If the veteran has always qualified for it, or has for some time, then it's either a supplemental claim or just a demand for adjudication, a request for an ancillary benefit, essentially. And again, the easiest way to do that is with a supplemental claim form. And our legal position is exactly what it says there. And this is language from Rice, part and parcel of any proceeding for compensation benefits. And you can also, the HLR will not necessarily understand it. So I would limit how many times you or going to the HLR to do this. But you can file notice of the disagreement, and the board is much better at at recognizing this as part of the rating. So again, as long as it's reasonably raised before or after the adjudication, okay, you don't have to point to something, despite some of the recent memo decisions that have come out. You don't have to point to something that existed prior to the decision to show that it was reasonably raised. The case law allows you to raise it even after the decision has been made. That was Rice. Rice said, I'm not happy with the rating you gave me. I want a TDIU, and Rice said, yep, you have to consider it back to the initial rating. So be careful in how you plead this. I would encourage you to really point to a specific date that you want and say, and develop your evidence, whether it's lay or medical evidence, establishing the need for that SMC as of that date. And typically it'll be tied to a specific claim that you think has been continuously pursued, or some other prior claim that it can still be reasonably raised. So that's not off the table either. So looking at cases like Roberson v. Principi at the Federal Circuit is probably your best starting point for looking at reasonably raised claims. And as I said, the board is doing a decent job taking jurisdiction over SMC that's raised for the first time. Some of the board members don't really understand what that means. We're still getting decisions where they say, yeah, we have jurisdiction of it, but because you raised it after the rating decision, we can't assign a rating because it's during the closed record period, or it's outside of the closed record period. We've seen a lot of that, or they'll just say, yeah, we're going to deny it because there's no duty to assist error because you didn't tell us about it until after the RO's decision. And so it's taking jurisdiction of it is helpful because we at least have some proof that it's part of that pending claim. But the board is still a little bit frustrating in how they're inconsistently treating this. The other thing to keep in mind is when you go to the board with this, in almost every case, they will not mention what the effective date is. And so far, the courts have not allowed us to appeal that. I don't really. We're actively trying to figure it out, but the courts are treating it as if it's a downstream issue, as if entitlement to SMC is its own thing, just like acknowledging that a back injury is service, the disability is service connected. And so that's something that you'll have to fight. If they're going to grant the SMC, the RO is going to mess up the effective date, and then you'll have to file another appeal to get the effective date corrected. So if you have older veterans that can advance on the docket, don't even bother going to court is my recommendation. Just file that next notice of disagreement, and the board will usually fix it. They might tell you that there's no supplemental claim in between, and then you've got your own mess of it. But the board is not typically assigning effective dates when you first raise it to them. All right. Here's an example of how it can work. And this is a real example. TBI filed in 2013. Need for aid and attendance the next year. And again, the veterans are not aware of this. They don't know that these even exist or that they could potentially qualify for them. And the VA does a terrible job of advertising it. So they grant the claim, they give them SMC L, but they go based on the date that he submitted the DBQ form. But under, as we just talked about, under Rice and 155D2, it's an ancillary benefit to that 2013 claim. Now here it was very easy because the 2013 claim had been continuously pursued up until the grant, and then it was just a matter of recognizing that continuous pursuit claim. And in addition to what he already had gotten, this a correct effective date got him 357,000 additional dollars that, you know, a guy with a severe brain injury in a wheelchair, 24/7 care, that their family can certainly use that. Okay. And again, you don't have to have continuously pursued a claim so long as it was raised. So you can, again, raise it with your own filings after the decision comes out, supplemental claim, HLR, NOD. In the legacy world, 3156B can be used to leverage a pending claim or a pending issue. And this is where, again, Roberson comes in, and some of those other cases, Comer and I think Norris was out of the Veterans Court. If it's there, the VA was required to look at it and assess it and make a decision on it. And you can, under Roberson, if it was reasonably raised, you file the request and fashion it as a CUE for failure to adjudicate, or if it hadn't been adjudicated, it's pending. And so now you can open up some of these earlier claims that, you know, the VA overlooked and the veteran didn't know he or she could request it, all of these SMC ratings. Okay. No questions yet?
Actually, Kenny, I have a question.
Sure.
Why does it seem like the ROs are pretty good at identifying the ancillary benefit within SMCK and like SMCS when they meet the 100% and 60% criteria, but not noticing housebound and aid attendance?
Because they are untrained, poorly trained, and overworked. So their training is very minimal. I've talked with a couple of folks that I know who work there and several DROs that I've known for a number of years, and their training is very, very minimal. Most of their training is how to use the computer system in order to send a claim through the process. And their training is limited to the most common issues that they get. So they see a lot of PTSD. They see a lot of back injuries, shoulder injuries, things like this. So they get a lot of training and a lot of practice on those. So they get better. I won't say good, but they get better at those in other claims. So their training is lacking. They're overworked to this. And what I mean by that is that they have to do a certain number of tasks every single week or they get fired. And so when they get their queue of claims and other things that they're doing, they have to do those in the amount of time provided, or else they lose their job. And so it takes a lot of time to go through and read for these and develop these claims like they're supposed to, when they can just send it off and hopefully the veteran will file an appeal. And they just don't understand it. You know, when you talk to them about the aid and attendance in particular, they don't know how to qualify for it. And you read it through. I do a lot of hearings, so I hear a lot from them. I ask them these questions at the hearing. And I say, as part of the hearing officer's duty in your regulation, you have to fully explain the issues to me. So I want to hear from you. How do I prove entitlement to aid and attendance? And you get 15 different answers from 15 different people. And then you start dissecting the language. Well, show me where it says that in the reg, and they can't. And well, it's in the M21. So then you go to the M21, show me where it says that. And they're like, well, it doesn't really say that, but So they don't know, and that's a long answer to your question, but that's another reason why I try to bypass the RO as much as I can on these and go straight to the board.
Thank you.
So this is the form that we're talking about. You can see here biographical information, pretty standard. Make sure that you're checking the SMC compensation and not pension. Sometimes the doctor or somebody will check the wrong box and the VA will act like you're asking for pension, and then they'll deny pension because your compensation's more. Here's some information about the examiner. And then you'll list here the disabilities. Hopefully it's a service-connected disability. But keep in mind, this form can be used to help support a claim for caregiver benefits. Some vitals, and then down here is some of the information that they're going to show. You'll see here, these are all the activities of daily living that kind of correlate to the regulation. Transferring in and out of a bed or chair, that one's often overlooked. Hygiene needs, toileting, dressing, eating, bathing, showering, etc. And then there's some space here to describe limitations on specific body parts and areas, and then the examiner's signature and their information. So this form is very useful when you can get it, but you don't have to have it. So if you can't get it, if the veteran's doctor won't fill it out, because a lot of them go to their VA doctors are not going to help out. So if you can't get it, that's fine. You can have the veteran fill this out, or the veteran's spouse fill this out, and use it as a guide for the kind of information you're going to want. You will need to link those impairments to a service injury or disease, but they're competent to say that the veteran can't get up off the toilet on his own because of his shoulder, or she can't tie her shoes because her back doesn't allow her to bend down far enough. They can certainly testify to that.
Kenny?
Yeah.
So I had a question about, and I know you guys have talked about this and there's an issue, but the mental health primarily being connected to the need for aid and attendance, and why that's so hard, and what tips can you give us when we're talking to the vet, when we're having them fill out forms, talking to their providers about how to document, that kind of thing, to help them get it strictly based off their mental health?
So mental health, you said mental health for aid and attendance?
Yes, like PTSD, and that's their main thing that they need aid and attendance for, the forgetfulness, the agitation, can't go out, can't do anything, those
Yeah.
kind of things.
Yeah, so with psychiatric conditions, the VA so helpfully attributes memory issues to every psychiatric condition. And I think that that's probably correct in most cases. But a veteran who's 80 years old, if they never had PTSD, they're still going to have a pretty bad memory. I'm not aware of very many 80-year-olds that have a sharp memory. And if you are, you're very lucky. I'm not nowhere close to that, and my memory sucks. So I'm fearful about the next half of my life. But so what I do in that case is, number one, remember that by statute and regulation, the VA is bound by favorable findings. So the other thing to remember is make sure that I'll caveat the next thing with this statement, that make sure that you're being very aware of the difference between a disability and a symptom or a disease or a condition. So what do I mean by that? PTSD, you don't receive compensation for PTSD. PTSD is a disease that was incurred because of something that happened to you in service. You're compensated for the resulting disability, which are the functional impairments. Psychiatric conditions are unique because they focus primarily on the symptoms, but those symptoms produce some kind of functional impairment. And when the VA says that their memory issues, forgetting names, forgetting recent events, short-term memory loss, getting lost, those kinds of symptoms that are, in the regulation, in the diagnostic code, you'll see them just listed down there for a 70% rating, and particularly for a total rating. Those symptoms produce a functional impairment. So make sure that you're being very discreet and very deliberate about describing what functioning can he or she not do because of the memory loss. You can have a memory issue and it not cause any functional impairment at all. Very rare, but just like you can have pain, and other than it being painful, it doesn't limit your ability to function in any way. So look at what functioning is impaired, and typically with the memory problems, we're seeing two things, both of them dealing with hazards. So my veterans, I always ask them, do you cook? Yes or no? No. Why not? Well, my wife takes care of it, or I order out. And then you say, well, if you tried to cook, could you? Well, no. And you can kind of, I try not to lead them too much because I don't want them to agree with me. I want to hear it from them. But typically what they do when they're cooking is they'll leave things on and burn the house down. And I actually had a veteran whose house was burned down, and they had to, they had some, the whole house didn't burn down, but the kitchen caught on fire. And that's a problem. So it's very dangerous for them to cook. And so they need somebody there because they forget they put something in the oven, they forget they left the pot on the stove, whatever it is. The other one is medications. If you don't have a good memory, you won't remember to take your medicine. You won't remember if you took your medicine. And if they have a lot of different medications, particularly diabetes, hypertension, things that keep them alive, or things that if they take too much of it, they could be seriously injured or killed, they're going to need somebody there. And they typically have somebody there to help them with that, to give them reminders, to lay out their pills for them, come in behind and make sure that they took them. So those are the kinds of questions you want to ask. One other that's less common, but sometimes you'll see it on the rating decision when they assign a rating. They will sometimes need prompting for hygiene. So they won't shower for days if nobody tells them to. That can sometimes be part of the disability picture for a psychiatric condition. So in addition to the favorable findings, and don't forget that even though the statute says clear and convincing evidence, the regulations say that it's binding on all adjudicators, RO and the board, unless there's evidence of a clear and unmistakable error. That is entirely different than clear and convincing evidence. And so the regulation is much harder to overcome a favorable finding than the statute is. So once they've made that determination, they're bound by it. So you take that list of symptoms and you highlight all of the memory issues, and you say, VA, you've already said this veteran has severe memory issues. They forgot who I was when I walked out the room. That's how bad their memory is. And so because of that, now the wife, the husband, the children, the veteran can say, yeah, my memory is so bad. I need my wife, I need my son, my daughter to help me with my medicine. And right there, you've qualified for aid and attendance. The other aspect to that is service connection. Disabilities are service connected, not conditions. And so when they've said that a certain impairment, a functional impairment, is service connected, and it's been in place for more than 10 years under the statute 1059, I believe, they can never sever it. So if they've had a high rating for a number of years, and part of that rating has been a memory issue, they can keep that memory impairment as service connected for the rest of their lives, even if they later develop dementia. So look back at how long things have been service connected, understand the distinction between a disability and a condition or a symptom when you're briefing these to the board. Okay, did that answer your question? I
Yes,
think it did.
thank you very much. That was very, very informative.
Okay. Okay, different kinds of SMC. Physical range, this is one that we're mostly familiar with, S. There's the 100 plus 60S, but then under S2, this is one where they're housebound. I don't know that we see a lot of these. I've never run across it. I think we could probably make a good argument for somebody who doesn't get around much when they're physically unable. But usually when they're physically they can't leave the home because of physical ailments, they also qualify for aid and attendance because they're tripping and falling down, or they can't, dress and shower and doing things like that. But this is available if they don't quite get to that level, they're just substantially confined to their house. This one is probably more seen with psychiatric conditions where they don't want to go out because being around people really causes a lot of anxiety and triggers, and it's very, very difficult to be outside. And again, here, agoraphobia, hypervigilance, peripheral nerves. Okay. Bedridden, this is another one that I've never run across. But if they're taken to bed, then they probably also qualify for aid and attendance. So I guess you can kind of choose your poison and which one you want to use. But this one I've honestly never tried, so I don't know how difficult it would be to prove. I would be shocked if anybody in the VA knew how to adjudicate this correctly, even at the board. I don't know that this gets seen very much. So if you do present this as an entitlement, just be aware of that, and you're going to definitely have to walk them through it, and just skip the RO entirely and go to the board. They're never going to understand it. So SMCL, bedridden, aid and attendance, pays, as we said, about $936 a month more for a married veteran. Loss of use. You can have actual loss of use where the limb is gone, the eye is gone, or you can have functional loss of use. And just, I don't have a lot to say on that here, but just know that there are regulations that define loss of use. It's the thing to keep in mind that the board always messes up is it's focused on the remaining function, not what they can't do, but what they can do. And I think the regulation is actually well written for a VA reg, and if you follow it, you can usually, if you can get the board to actually follow the regulation, then you can usually get them to grant it. With loss of use, though, keep in mind that there's single losses of use, hand or foot, which is K, but if you lose both of them, both feet, both hands, then you start to get to the L and higher ratings, and that's where you really start to get the much higher compensation rates. And then just look at the regular or the statute for where they are. I mean, it's very self-explanatory. 2 feet, 2 hands, at the elbow, at the knee, at the shoulder, at the hip, and then as it goes up closer to the body, it's next higher ratings. Okay. Aid and attendance. Yeah.
Do you ever see, and I know it might just be like our exposure to clients is obviously different than like the people who are seeing success without us. We may not see that, but I have a curiosity because I feel like there's always clients out there who have these like really terrible permanent loss of use where they've lost parts of their body. And I see, you know, whether it's online or whatever, and they're like, well, I don't have 100%, but I've lost a leg and I've lost, you know, 6 of my fingers or something. And is it because they don't have their 100% that VA is ignoring the fact that they should be receiving the SMCs? Like,
No.
it's just seems crazy that there's people out there missing limbs and the VA is like, well, you're not quite disabled enough. Like,
It's because they don't know what they're doing, I believe. I honestly don't know why. I mean, they're supposed to review the record and grant every benefit supported by law. That's their own regulation says that. But again, if it's not on the form, then they're not going to look at it.
right. And I guess if you don't know it exists, that makes sense.
Right. Okay, so we have this SMC ladder, starting typically with L, because that's where the aid and attendance resides. Sometimes you'll get, you know, as I said, loss of use of both hands or both legs, or both feet, then you'll start at L or M. But what you're trying to do from here is taking, and the question, I think, was that you, Tina, that asked that, how do you prove SMC aid and attendance for the psychiatric condition all on its own? Why is that important? Well, this is why it's important, because you can, depending on what they have in addition to that, you can get them all the way up to R1 without showing two, with, you know, by getting to O under the under 3.350 F3 and F4. So we always try to start with aid and attendance, and I understand the regulations to say that the VA has to use the absolute minimum amount of disability to support a rating, and then they stop. And if there's additional functional impairment, if there's additional disability that's not necessarily encompassed within that that diagnostic code, for instance, then they have to find a way to rate it otherwise. And one of the examples I think that best illustrates it are the joints. Joints are rated on limited motion. If you have limited motion and you also have a sleep impairment because of that joint pain, that sleep impairment has to be accounted for in some kind of rating. So when you have a complete disability picture, psychiatric, some organs, maybe there's cancer or something like that, diabetes, you have physical problems with the joints, you can't just say, yeah, all of those combined, you need aid and attendance. That may be true, but you may only require aid and attendance for your memory issues. And separately, those other conditions have to be accounted for in some way, and that's where this ladder, as we call it, steps in.
Kenny, on that
Yeah.
slide you had regular versus constant.
Yeah.
So what is the definition of regular?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, we don't know. I think that it's not constant because it says that in the regulation. I think that regular is I would just say colloquially as on a regular basis, as you would say. So if it's once a week, that probably qualifies. If it's most of the time, certainly that qualifies. If it's occasionally, you know, a couple times a month, probably not. But it has to be considered in light of what they're helping with. So if a veteran has, let's say they have a bad shoulder that when it's flared up, they can't put their shirt on by themselves and they need help. Or a lower back that they can't bend down and put their socks and shoes on, but it only flares up a couple times a year. that's probably not going to be enough. But if it's a condition where if they overuse it, the shoulder, for instance, and it's really, really painful, then they need help dressing. And because of whatever they happen to be doing, their job or whatever activities around the house, it flares up a couple times a week, maybe every other week. Now you're starting to get creep towards the regular basis. So, push the envelope on that. And, again, I use a lot of hearings when I do these aid and attendance claims because I want the VA's input on what qualifies as this. And once they say it on the record, they're kind of stuck with it, or at least that's the legal argument. And if it's, as long as it's not clearly wrong from the regulation, if it fits within the regulation's language, then you have a very good legal argument to say, you said that if I can show this, you would grant it. I showed it, now you have to grant it. And then there's a whole fair process and perhaps even a due process argument that gets tied up in there. But I would say most of the time, as the simplest answer, not every time, and between half and most of the time is probably where it lies.
Okay, so to dig a little bit deeper, and I don't mean to be taking your time with this, but
No,
so like obviously a spouse being at home all the day is more on a daily basis, which obviously qualifies. Say VA provides 4 hours a week or 8 hours a week or 16 hours a week. Is there okay, is 4 enough? Is it, what I'm saying? Is there like what are your thoughts? Again, depending on what they're doing for the vet, like you said.
Right. I mean, if they're there to supervise them, to keep them from hurting themselves because they fall down or they have a bad memory, then that absolutely that qualifies, because it's a recognition that they need somebody there to do that every single day. And when they're not there, is the veteran alone? Or is the spouse now there, or another family member there when that healthcare worker is not? And so even though and maybe they're there for 4 hours a day, but during those 4 hours, that's when they bathe, that's when they shave them. And so even though they only need a couple hours a day, they have to have some assistance, and the spouse is also elderly and can't physically do it, so the VA brings in somebody, or they pay out of pocket and they bring in somebody to do those activities that the family member can't because they're just too, the veteran's either very large or the spouse or family member is just too small or disabled themselves. So I wouldn't necessarily look at the length of time, more on what they're doing, because medications, once or twice a day, I don't know that too many people take certain medicines multiple times a day for a long period of time. Usually that's something that's very acute and it's to treat a specific thing. But life-preserving medicines, hypertension, insulin, other things are typically taken once or twice a day. And so if they need somebody there in the morning, for instance, to help with those medicines, but the family member's there in the evening to help, even if it's for 30 minutes, that still qualifies.
Kenny, is it reasonable to argue that if they need any sort of regular, meaning weekly, they have someone, whether that's a home health aide or family member or something, that comes and takes care of them, whether it's skilled nursing or unskilled nursing, for example, that they need aid and attendance, like that would be regular? If they're getting any amount of hours, I feel like would be considered regular if it's weekly, like it's on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And again, it's based on what activities they're needing help with. If it's bathing, if it's showering, if it's feeding, then you don't do that 24 hours a day. You do it periodically. You do it once a day, or with eating, a couple times a day. If it's just supervising to make sure they don't trip and fall or wander out the door and down the street and get lost because they have dementia or something, then it focus on what they can't do. Remember, disability is functional impairment. What functioning is impaired, and does it match up under any of those those elements within the regulation. Okay. So these are the functionings, and the regulation lists these, but this is not an all-inclusive list. There's other things outside of this that could potentially open up an aid and attendance rating. But typically you're going to see activities of daily living, dressing, showering, bathing, shaving, things like that, toileting, getting up and on and off the toilet can be very challenging if you have bad hips, bad knees, eating. So the way that they word it in eating is that because of some problem with their hands, they can't manipulate the utensils to put the food in their mouth. But again, it's a non-exclusive list. So if they have trouble swallowing and they need somebody to, blend up the food into something that they could drink, then that might be there. But we see a lot of folks with Parkinson's and neuropathy, nerve problems, radiculopathy, who can't hold a spoon or a fork. And so they need somebody to help with that. But I will say that the ones that are the easier to prove, I don't do a lot of eating ones just because I think most people can eat even if they're really, really, really disabled. You can figure out a way to shovel food in your mouth. But the dressing is really, ask about that. When you have folks who have really bad lower back problems, or are really, really overweight because of their disabilities, and they can't bend over and say, put their shoes on, put their socks on. They have neuropathy with their hands where they have weakened grip, so they can't, and fine motor skills are affected, so they can't tie their laces. Buttoning buttons are next to impossible for most folks with really bad hand problems. Those kinds of questions, but don't be satisfied, because you'll say, do you dress yourself? And they'll say, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, when's the last time you've worn a button-up shirt? Oh, I don't wear those because I can't button the buttons. When's the last time you wore shoes that had laces on it? Well, I don't use that because, so, don't stop, dig in there, ask those very detailed questions about getting dressed. Showering's the same thing. They may shower on their own, but ask how many times they fell in the shower or getting out of the bathtub. And you'll probably hear that they, fell and laid on the ground until the ambulance or the neighbor came to get them up. And then the last piece of this is the hazards or dangers incident to his or her environment. We will hopefully know what this means a little bit more. We have this specific phrase, this portion of the regulation at the Federal Circuit in one of our cases. And we're asking the court to address whether it has to be a real danger or just an exposure to a potential danger. And the veteran there has a very severe condition where if you touch the side of his neck, he'll just lose consciousness and fall down. It's a really bizarre circulatory issue. And he says, if he shaves, it'll happen. He turns his head the wrong way, it'll happen. And it's documented by the doctors. So, and they said that wasn't enough. So I don't know if that's not dangerous, then I don't know what is.
Hey, Kenny.
Yeah.
One thing I've been trying to put in hazards and dangers is anytime I see anybody with hallucinations. Do you think that's a good place to put that?
Potentially. I mean, you need to develop it and show how it's dangerous. But yeah, I don't see too many folks with hallucinations, so I haven't really dealt with it a lot. But I think you can generally just say this person has hallucinations and delusions, and so he needs help. I think most folks would be like, yeah, I can see that. But you would have to show that it exposes him to some potential danger. So if the hallucinations are that people are attacking the house, I don't know. I mean, that
Right.
could. Or they're
So he
driving.
goes out into the yard with a gun and then he's in danger, of a whole bunch of different things and endangering everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But that one seems a little harder to me, probably because I haven't really thought about it much. But I think it should qualify for that. Okay, we're almost done. The next thing to look at here is SMCO is assigned when you have, one way is to get 2 ratings at L through N, then you're going to be rated at O. And then if one of those is also aid and attendance, then you bump up to R1. So R1 is really that you have an O rating and you need regular aid and attendance. The slide says 3 service-connected disabilities, each to need aid and attendance. That is not correct. You only need 1 aid and attendance and 2 L through N's, or O and aid and attendance. And there's a bunch of different ways to get to O, but basically when you get to O and you need aid and attendance, then you qualify for R1. And if you have 2 aid and attendance, then you are at R1, not 3. R2, in the absence of such care, you would require hospitalization, nursing home care, or other residential institutional care. Doesn't say you are receiving this care, just that you would require this care. So if the spouse or the adult child or some caretaker is taking care of the veteran in their home, or the caregiver under the caregiver program that the VA has is allowing them to stay at home, they would still qualify for this rating. You do have to have a doctor or some medical professional say that he needs additional care, that without it, he would have to be hospitalized, or she would. Look for things like administration of medications. So diabetes, if you take an insulin shot and they can't do that on their own, then they would require some kind of institutional care in order to do that. Or, some of the later stages of dementia with Parkinson's and even some of the psychiatric conditions, as they progress, it gets to the point where they have to be in some environment that's going to keep them from wandering and dying. Alaska is the case that I mentioned last year that interpreted the statute and said the VA's regulation is invalid. All you need is that you need aid and attendance for the TBI. You don't qualify for R2, but the need is you need some kind of institutional care without the regular aid and attendance. So it's very similar to R2, but you don't have to get to O first. You just have to have a TBI. And that's, as far as I understand, that's the distinction here between R2 and T, is that the level of care is still the same, but you don't have to go through through O first. You can have just TBI and have a single rating, and you would qualify for T if it was severe enough. All right. Identify discrete disabilities that require aid and attendance. We already talked about that. If you can, if they've submitted the 2680, I think the internet right now is flooded with aid and attendance. So, because I'm hearing a lot of my veterans asking about it. So we're seeing more and more of these forms in the claims file, even before we get involved. So take a look at those. Look at, very discrete impairments. Again, individual disabilities. What's the minimum number of disabilities that you need to get them to be in need of aid and attendance? Wheelchairs. If you're in a wheelchair, you probably need help with doing something. There's not a lot of things that you can't do everything. Caregiver program materials. And then there's some other types of conditions that typically show up on aid and attendance. Functional assessment instrument, that was included with the materials. When we do, if we haven't already, the caregiver presentation, it'll go much more in detail on that. But those forms are hugely helpful because there's so much information in there in showing that they need aid and attention. Even if they say they don't qualify for a caregiver, there's usually a lot in there that'll help you. Keep in mind that the functional assessment is based on the whole body and is not specifically limited to service-connected disabilities. But there will certainly be a lot of information in there. And here again, VA thinks that a doctor has to complete it, but you don't. A layperson can complete that form. Again, it's just a document that contains information that's relevant to the aid and attendance rating. And the board will typically understand that, but the RO won't. All right. 100 plus 60, we already talked about that. 2 L's for O. And then if one of them is aid and attendance, it automatically goes up to R1. Look at loss of use. So with lower extremity disabilities, whether they're physical, whether they're joints or nerves, ask them how they get around their house. And ask them, do you go to the store? Do you go out much? Do you walk? Do you walk around your neighborhood? What does it look like coming into your house? Are there steps? Are there ramps? Very detailed questions, because what you're looking for is lower extremity disability that they shuffle their feet because of weakness in the joints or because of the nerve weakness. A lot of times really bad ankle conditions will prevent them from lifting their toes up so their toe catches on things. Do they go up and down stairs? Most veterans at a later stage that have these kind of problems will just avoid stairs completely. And if they have a 2-story home, they just live downstairs. They never go upstairs because they fall down and get hurt. Tripping on rugs in the house, things like that. So you can show loss of use of both feet in that way. And remember, the regulation says that is remaining function such that you would have, and I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but basically it's the same as if you had prosthetics there. And I've never had it, but try to imagine if you had prosthetic feet, you could still get around, but it would be very difficult, and stairs would be hard, and you might trip on things that are in the way. So you don't have to have, no feet to where you're in a wheelchair, but that's the standard. Lost use of hands is a little bit more difficult to prove, just because you can live without using your hands very much, but you almost always need your feet to get around. All right. Disability rated at total under 3.350 F4 will get you to the next higher rating. And the regulation excludes TDIU. I am actively trying to get that invalid because there's no difference between TDIU and a total rating. They're both total ratings. And the regulation excludes it for it's basically an arbitrary distinction that has no basis in law. And it's inconsistent with everything else in the statutes and regulations. So if you have this is another way to really build, if you can show that a single disability, say headaches at 50%, producing severe economic inadaptability, almost everybody with a 50% rating is going to be unemployable. And even though they may be working, you can probably show that they can't work because of their headaches. And if you have, say, an aid and attendance and a 50% headache, rather than L to L.5, you can get them all the way up to M. So, develop some of those single disabilities for 100%, particularly when there is no total rating. So, headaches, the max you can get is 50. Even if you are totally disabled, you can only get a 50. Okay, so Barry, we are almost done here. So Barry v. McDonough, there's the case site. Hugely important decision. Prior to Barry, the VA would limit increases. Well, let me pull up the regulation. Okay, so here's the regulation. In addition to any of the statutory rates, L through N, and any intermediate rate, independently ratable disabilities will go to the next higher intermediate rate. Okay, so if you're at L and you have sleep apnea, you go to L.5. The VA for years limited that to just one use. So if you had 10 different 50% ratings, you could only go to L.5. That's it. The Federal Circuit said that's not what the regulation says. It essentially leaves all those other disabilities uncompensated. And now you can stack these, you can go up the ladder, whatever word picture you want to use. But now you can use multiple combinations of disabilities in order to get to the highest possible SMC rating. So here's our client with 100% PTSD that warrants an attendance. They have migraines, sleep apnea, lumbar spine, some nerves, diabetes, etc. Okay. After Barry, you can see we can get them all the way up to N.5. So L, you do the 50, the sleep apnea, and so on. And then, even though they're only at N.5, because they also had erectile dysfunction and SMCK, the statute O says 2 L through N's or N.5 plus K. Get you to O, and then you have the aid in attendance. Now you're at R1. And trust me, this will make a lot of sense after you've done it about 150 times. It's really hard to wrap your head around the first few times you do it. So the best way to do this is just repetition and look at these over and over and over again. There is a restriction. So the disabilities that you're using to take these half steps, as I call them, must be separate and distinct and involve different anatomical segments or bodily symptoms from whatever established the next lower rate. So I'm not entirely sure how this should be interpreted. The way that I look at it is that each time you're trying to add a half step or a whole step, because it's the same language in 4 with the total ratings, it can't be duplicative in the sense of pyramiding as any disability that was used in the prior rating. So going back to our example, so we have PTSD, and let's say it's memory issues, okay? Now, you can't use memory issues to get any more disability, but migraines you can. It's a different anatomical segment or a body system, whereas the PTSD and the migraines are both in the brain. It's a different symptom. One is a bodily system. One is the nerves, and then the other is, it's the brain, and then the other is kind of the brain, but it's more of a mental condition. That one's a little more iffy, and I'm not sure how the courts would treat those, but sleep apnea is a respiratory problem. That one clearly has nothing to do with PTSD, memory, or headache pain. Then you have the spine and hearing loss. Your hearing is a different body system. Yes, it's nerves to some degree, but it's separate from the nerves. I would look at the way that the VA has broken up their rating codes, the rating schedule. And so you'll see, psychiatric conditions are 4.124A and or 12130, and so their mental conditions and nerves are in 4.124A. The VA has acknowledged that they're different body systems, and so that's a good starting point. Then you have the spine. Now, again, we have some nerves in here and a kidney, diabetes, and shoulders. I don't see any problem with those. These nerves down here may cause you that may be a roadblock there because the nerves and the migraines, but I think that because it's now a different body segment, the headaches, the PTSD is the brain. These, yes, they're the same body system, but they're a different segment. So now you have the lower extremities. That's how you get the 50% there. And then you have the shoulders, upper extremities, and diabetes. Diabetes is a different body system. Kidneys are a different body system. And so those are, that's how you walk up the ladder. I'll pause for a couple minutes in case anybody had questions.
I had kind of a specific question. I had a vet, and I don't remember what he's at right now. I know we're trying to get him a higher level of special monthly compensation due to his foot drop, but at some point, I want to say he's at M or N. But at some point during them giving him a higher level, they dropped his K. And I think I read somewhere that that is a possibility, but it wasn't supposed to happen at that level. I don't remember what the level was though.
Yeah. Susie, you want to answer that?
I would love to. So they're not supposed to drop it until O, and I unfortunately know this because a client just emailed me and was like, I'm pretty sure they stopped paying me my SMCK. And I was like,
Right.
I'm only L. We are arguing, I think, for her to get like R1, I believe is what we're at the board waiting. She's not available for advancement. But basically they dropped it. So I have a demand letter if you need one. If as long as he's under O.
Yeah, he's under O. So, and that was my question because we've already submitted an appeal with the foot drop and then requested K be added back on, and then they're like, "Well, this is like a new claim." We're like, "No." So we confuse them, of course.
Well, I don't have results from my demand letter yet, but
Okay.
it was just last week, I think. But
Just
hopefully
curious.
it's successful. They dropped it in 2019 and we just noticed. So
Yeah. So VA thinks that you can't continue to receive K once you're past L, and that's just wrong. So if check your veterans and see if that's happening. I was not aware that they were doing that until just a couple weeks ago. So we're going to go back and look and see if there's any additional ones that have been dropped as well. And I can't even find any authority for it. It's not in their M21. There's no regular. They're just doing it.
Thanks, Kenny. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Wrap up because we've got about 10 minutes till we've been here for an hour and a half. So SMCK, really important, if they have a site condition, if they're a male, they probably have erectile dysfunction. The medications do that. Diabetes, hypertension, a whole host of medicines cause problems for men, even when they're older. Prostate cancer, even when they're younger. Prostate cancer, almost always, the treatment causes that. With females, I don't do a lot of female loss of use in the creative organ area. They usually already have that established. But there certainly could be a mental component to it where they have some kind of, it's not necessarily a physical reason why they just can no longer do that because they don't have the desire because of, sexual trauma or otherwise some PTSD or something.
I had a female client who actually taught me that women can get 2 different SMCK because she had to have a hysterectomy and breast cancer treatment.
Right.
So I had not realized that.
Yeah. And I think the ovaries are a third way to, I think those are separate. So ovaries, the uterus, and the breast. So, and then also there's the buttocks. I don't see that too often, but some people take shrapnel or a bullet to their rear, and they lose the use of that. Those muscles, if you don't know, are very important in walking and standing and sitting and all of that. And then there's loss of use of one foot. So you mentioned foot drop. That I imagine the K. So, and actually, now that I say that, if the K rating was for loss of use, and then they later got a higher rating for the same impairment, that may be why they lost the K.
No,
Because
it was ED. The K was for ED.
got it. Okay. But you can have unlimited number of K ratings. And I think there might even be an I in there somewhere. Okay. Service connect everything you possibly can. You know, we used to, in the old days, once you got to 100, you're like, why are you still filing claims? I'm done, get out of here. But for the veteran, there's a lot of value in, if you see a veteran who's, you're looking at him, you're like, that's probably, you know, when you turn 65, 70, you're probably going to need some aid and attendance. Establishing service connection early can really help them in the long run, even though today it may not equal any more money. Now that's a tough situation to have, because do you just tell them, hey, you might want to pursue this, but I'm not going to help you because I can't get paid for it? Or do you, do it for free? Those are the choices there. That's between you and your client and whatever your organization that you work for decides. But sometimes it might be very helpful to finish an appeal because you think that down the road they're probably going to need aid and attendance. Today they might not qualify, but you're pretty certain at some point they will. And again, this is one of those Parkinson's types of things, severe PTSD, severe neuropathy, things like that. They may be doing okay now, but they might need it. That may be, even though you spend a few extra months, you get it service connected, and you tell them, well, if it gets worse, come see me. You've got a client waiting for you potentially if that need arises. I'm sure they'll come back to you, since you already helped them so much. But if you've already got your SMC, file for everything and just keep going until you can get to R1. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see anything on the chat. So if there are no questions, I want to thank everyone for participating. You all have my email, hopefully. If you don't, Tammy does. And feel free to email me if you're outside of the organization. If you're in, you can call me. But that concludes our SMC.
Thanks, Ken. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.